She just couldn't hold back her anger.
I hate you! And you can feel my skin! I hate you, dog!
The stepdaughter of a woman killed as young children looked on comes face to face with the killer. Wait until you hear what she said before the judge hauled him off to prison.
Father's Day, a day meant for celebration and honoring paternal bonds, turned into an unimaginable nightmare for one Detroit family on June 18th, 2017. As 14-year-old Justin played video games and 4-year-old Jada watched her mother get ready for a family gathering, none of them could have predicted the horror that would unfold in their new home on Avon Avenue. The sound of arguing suddenly pierced the Sunday afternoon calm, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunshots echoing through the halls. What happened next would forever alter the lives of these innocent children, as they witnessed the aftermath of a brutal act of violence that their mother had been desperately trying to escape. In her final moments, 42-year-old Latrese Morris-Dorsey, a woman who had recently moved to start fresh after ending a toxic relationship, took her last breaths in the arms of her teenage son, a son who would carry this trauma for the rest of his life. Latrese Morris-Dorsey was a dedicated physical therapist and devoted mother of 3 who radiated warmth to everyone she met. Described by her sister Megan as a beautiful person inside and out, Latrese had recently moved her family to a new home in Detroit, symbolizing her determination to build a better life. At 42, she was deeply connected to her close-knit family, including her 72-year-old father James, who adored his daughter. Latrese embodied resilience and hope, working tirelessly to create stability and happiness for her children despite the challenges she faced in her personal relationships. Have you ever noticed subtle warning signs in a relationship that made you uncomfortable? As we explore Latrese's story, I want you to consider, could this tragedy have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you recognize these patterns in your own life or someone else's, please keep watching. In today's episode, we'll uncover the events that led to Latrese's murder at the hands of her ex-boyfriend, Earl Maxwell, who had explicitly threatened her life in the days before the attack. We'll examine how a man who once had Latrese tattooed on his arm as a symbol of love later claimed he accidentally shot her 10 times on Father's Day, a claim that defies both logic and evidence. We'll walk through the relationship's deterioration and the escalating danger that culminated in that fatal day when Maxwell allegedly entered Latrese's home and committed an act of violence so severe that her young daughter could only repeat the devastating words, "My mom is dead. He killed my mom." Beyond the tragedy itself, we'll explore the profound impact on Latrese's children, particularly Justin, who held his dying mother in his arms, yet somehow found the strength to graduate high school and attend college 4 years later. We'll analyze the warning signs that were present and discuss what interventions might have saved Latrese's life. Most importantly, we'll share critical information about recognizing dangerous relationships and accessing resources that could help others avoid similar fates. This isn't just a story about death. It's about recognizing patterns that could save lives. At 42, Latrese Morris-Dorsey had built a life centered around healing others and nurturing her family. As a physical therapist, she dedicated her professional life to helping patients recover movement and manage pain, a career that perfectly matched her naturally compassionate nature. Colleagues remembered her as thorough and genuinely invested in her patients' progress, often going beyond clinical requirements to ensure their comfort. But Latrese's true passion was motherhood. Her 3 children, 14-year-old Justin, 4-year-old Jada, and her 3rd child, were the anchors of her world. Despite the demands of single parenthood and a full-time healthcare career, she maintained an active presence in their lives. She attended Justin's school events, played princess games with little Jada, and created a home environment where her children felt both loved and secure. Even on busy days, Latrese made time for bedtime stories and homework help, embodying the kind of mother who somehow managed to be everywhere her children needed her to be. Latrese came from a tight-knit family where bonds ran deep and support was unwavering. Her father, James Morris, spoke of his middle daughter with unmistakable pride, often telling friends how she'd inherited his work ethic and her mother's kindness. The special connection between father and daughter made the Father's Day timing of her death all the more devastating. A day meant to celebrate their bond instead marked its violent severing. Her sister Megan described Latrese as the family mediator, the one who could diffuse tensions with well-timed humor and practical solutions. She was sunshine in human form, Megan would later tell reporters, always finding something positive even in difficult situations. This optimism wasn't naivety, but a deliberate choice Latrese made daily. Friends noted her infectious laugh and the way she listened, truly listened, when others spoke. She possessed that rare quality of making everyone feel important, from her children's friends to strangers she encountered, creating connections that outlived her. In the spring of 2017, Latrese made a decision that signaled her determination to reshape her family's future. She moved her children into a modest but cheerful home in the 20,000 block of Avon Avenue in Detroit, a fresh start away from the relationship that had increasingly dominated her life, with fear and control. The move represented more than a change of address. It was a declaration of independence. Neighbors recalled seeing Latrese planting flowers along the walkway with little Jada by her side, transforming the previously neglected yard into something vibrant. Inside, she painted the children's rooms in colors they chose themselves, a small but significant way of establishing their new sense of agency. She enrolled in a financial planning course, opened a separate bank account, and began making plans for a family vacation, small steps toward the stable, joy-filled life she envisioned. The new home symbolized possibility, safety, and the future she would tragically never see. Latrese met Earl Maxwell through a mutual friend at a community fundraiser 3 years before her death. Initially, friends observed what seemed like a healthy relationship. Maxwell appeared attentive, bringing Latrese lunch at work and attending her children's school events. But subtle changes emerged as months passed. Latrese began canceling long-standing plans with friends, explaining away her increasing isolation as just being busy. The relationship's controlling nature revealed itself gradually. Maxwell began questioning her whereabouts, checking her phone, and expressing disapproval of certain friendships. Former co-workers later recalled Latrese wearing long sleeves even in summer months, possibly concealing bruises. By early 2017, the relationship had deteriorated significantly, with Maxwell's jealousy and possessiveness becoming more pronounced. What began as occasional arguments escalated to frightening confrontations, culminating in Latrese's decision to end the relationship and move, a choice that Maxwell refused to accept, as evidenced by his increasingly explicit threats in the weeks before her murder.
She just couldn't hold back her anger.
I hate you! And you can feel my skin! I hate you, dog!
The stepdaughter of a woman killed as young children looked on comes face to face with the killer. And wait until you hear what she said before the judge hauled him off to prison.
Raw emotion today inside a Detroit courtroom as Earl Maxwell was sentenced for the cold-blooded murder of his girlfriend.
Making matters worse is what Maxwell said to the court before his sentence was handed down. Let's get right to Mara McDonald. She's live tonight. Mara, he reportedly said he loved her.
He repeatedly, Kimberly, said that he loved her, and how her children managed to keep it together as well as they did, I have no idea, because the only thing worse than listening to this man blather on about how much he loved this woman that he murdered was when he started trying to justify what he did.
I hate you!
Children grieving their mother poured it all out in a Wayne County courtroom today. Earl Maxwell was the ex-boyfriend of Latrese Morris-Dorsey. He became so enraged with her, he busted into her home last year and shot and killed her right in front of her 4-year-old daughter with her 14-year-old son in a neighboring room.
My mom was the nicest person, the most caring person, and for you to take her out of my life like that hurts my heart so much.
What disgusted her children even more?
We were supposed to be dating. We were still dating until this plumber guy came along. Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone.
Maxwell continued on with things that had the judge telling him to zip it until finally...
But I was wrong. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and ain't no way I can repay this. It's between me and the Lord now. I just want to let y'all know that I have repented with every bone in my body, and I can never take this back down here on this earth. And I just want to let y'all know that the Lord gave me a dream that she's with the Lord. And that's the only thing that kept me from killing myself.
Earl Thomas Lionel Maxwell entered Latrese's life during what friends described as a period of renewed optimism for her. They met at a neighborhood barbecue in the summer of 2014, where Maxwell charmed not only Latrese, but her entire social circle with his attentiveness and apparent devotion. Standing 5'8" with a heavy build and distinctive bald head, Maxwell made an impression with his confident demeanor and the way he seemed genuinely interested in Latrese's work and children. The early months of their relationship progressed with the kind of romantic gestures that seemed straight from a movie. Surprise lunch deliveries to her workplace, thoughtful gifts for no particular occasion, and the grand gesture of tattooing Latrese on his left arm. He integrated himself into family gatherings, winning over even Latrese's cautious father with promises of providing stability. To outsiders, Maxwell appeared to be the supportive partner Latrese deserved after previous relationship disappointments, making what would follow all the more shocking to those who knew them. The transformation in Maxwell's behavior began subtly, almost imperceptibly. 6 months into their relationship, Latrese's closest friend noticed she had started checking her phone constantly, explaining she needed to let Earl know where she was. What initially seemed like considerate communication gradually revealed itself as mandatory check-ins. By the 1-year mark, Maxwell had established unspoken rules about Latrese's clothing, friendships, and schedule. More concerning patterns emerged as Maxwell began showing up unexpectedly at Latrese's workplace, claiming he was just in the neighborhood, but clearly monitoring her interactions with male colleagues. He questioned her children about who she spoke with when he wasn't present, creating an atmosphere of surveillance within her own home. The financial control followed next. Suggestions that she consult him before purchases became demands to see receipts and explanations for every expenditure. Perhaps most alarming was Maxwell's emotional manipulation. When Latrese expressed concerns about his behavior, he would alternate between tearful apologies and accusations that she was overreacting or trying to ruin a good thing. This gaslighting left her constantly questioning her own perceptions. Friends later recalled how Latrese began prefacing statements with, "I'm probably wrong, but," and apologizing excessively for minor issues. Her once confident demeanor had been systematically dismantled, replaced by a hesitancy that signaled her growing fear of Maxwell's unpredictable reactions, a classic sign of emotional abuse that would eventually escalate to physical violence. The breaking point came in February of 2017, when Justin witnessed Maxwell grab Latrese's arm with enough force to leave finger-shaped bruises during an argument about a text message on her phone. Seeing the fear in her son's eyes, and recognizing her children were now witnesses to her abuse, triggered something profound in Latrese. That night, after Maxwell left, she called her sister Megan and spoke the words she had been avoiding. "I need to get out before something worse happens." Over the next several weeks, Latrese methodically prepared her exit. She secretly saved money from each paycheck, secured important documents in a safety deposit box, and researched affordable housing options across town. She confided in her supervisor, who adjusted her schedule to reduce predictability. Most importantly, she began rebuilding the support network Maxwell had systematically isolated her from, reconnecting with friends and family who could help facilitate her escape. By April, she had signed a lease on the Avon Avenue house, telling Maxwell only after she and the children had already moved. Maxwell's initial response to Latrese's departure was a barrage of text messages alternating between desperate pleas and veiled threats. "You can't just throw away 3 years," he wrote, followed hours later by, "You'll regret making me look like a fool." When these messages went unanswered, he began appearing at locations Latrese frequented, her grocery store, her children's school, even her father's neighborhood, creating accidental encounters that left her constantly looking over her shoulder. By early June, Maxwell's tactics took a more sinister turn. He contacted Latrese's ex-husband, Paul Dorsey, making explicit threats that should have immediately triggered law enforcement intervention. "When I see your wife, I'm going to kill her," Maxwell told Dorsey in calls made approximately 2 weeks before the murder. Though Maxwell later called back claiming to recant these threats, the pattern of escalation was unmistakable to those familiar with domestic violence trajectories. In the final days before Father's Day, Maxwell's behavior became increasingly erratic. Neighbors reported seeing his car parked on Latrese Street for hours, though he never approached the house. He created multiple fake social media accounts to monitor her activities after she blocked his primary profiles. Most disturbingly, he purchased a handgun just days before the murder, the same weapon that would end Latrese's life as her children were nearby. Each escalation represented a critical warning sign that, tragically, did not result in the protection Latrese desperately needed. June 18th, 2017 dawned bright and clear in Detroit, a perfect Father's Day. In the modest home on Avon Avenue, Latrese woke early, determined to make the day special despite the underlying anxiety that had become her constant companion. She had planned a visit to her sister's house, where their father, James, would be celebrated with his favorite meal and the handmade cards his grandchildren had prepared. The morning unfolded with domestic tranquility. Latrese prepared a breakfast of pancakes shaped like ties, a tradition she maintained even after her divorce from the children's father. 14-year-old Justin sat at the kitchen counter, helping 4-year-old Jada color the last of her grandfather's card. Music played softly in the background as Latrese laid out the children's clothes for the afternoon gathering. She had chosen a yellow sundress for herself, her father's favorite color, and was just beginning to get ready when Justin retreated to his room to play video games and Jada followed her mother to watch her apply makeup. No one heard Maxwell approach the house. Neighbors would later report seeing his black sedan parked a block away, suggesting he had walked the remaining distance to avoid detection. Whether he used a key he had secretly kept or found another entry point remains unclear, but at approximately 2 p.m, he was inside the home Latrese had established as her sanctuary. The first indication of his presence was his voice, loud and accusatory, cutting through the peaceful afternoon. "You think you can just throw me away?" he shouted, confronting Latrese in the living room where she had been putting final touches on her appearance, with little Jada watching admiringly. According to what Jada later told family members, her mother's face changed instantly, from happiness to fear. "Earl, please. The kids are here. We can talk another time," Latrese reportedly said, attempting to defuse the situation and protect her children. But Maxwell was beyond reasoning. Witnesses described his appearance as disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, suggesting he had been drinking. He paced the living room, blocking the path to the front door as his accusations grew more heated. "You've been seeing someone else," he insisted, despite no evidence supporting this claim. "You made me look like nothing. You think I'm nothing." Each question brought him physically closer to Latrese, who had positioned herself between Maxwell and her daughter, instinctively shielding the child. What happened next occurred with devastating speed. Maxwell pulled a handgun from his waistband, the weapon he had recently purchased. Latrese shouted for Jada to run to her brother's room, a command the terrified child obeyed. Then came the shots, 5 distinct cracks that neighbors initially mistook for firecrackers until they registered the screams that followed. The first bullet struck Latrese in the abdomen, the second in her chest. As she fell to her knees, Maxwell continued firing. A third shot to her shoulder, a fourth to her upper chest, and a fifth to her head. The medical examiner would later determine that any one of 3 of these wounds would have been fatal on its own. Maxwell stood over her collapsed form, the gun still in his hand, before fleeing through the back door. Justin, hearing the commotion, emerged from his room just as his little sister ran in screaming. He rushed to the living room to find his mother on the floor, blood pooling beneath her. With remarkable presence of mind, the 14-year-old grabbed his mother's phone and dialed 911 while simultaneously trying to stem the bleeding with a throw pillow from the couch. "My mom's been shot," he told the dispatcher, his voice cracking. "Please hurry." While waiting for emergency services, Justin cradled his mother's head in his lap, telling her to hold on. That help was coming. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshots, began gathering outside. One of them, Ron Wilson, rushed in when he heard Justin's cries and attempted CPR, but Latrese's injuries were too severe. By the time paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, Latrese Morris-Dorsey had taken her final breaths in her teenage son's arms, a son who had just witnessed the most traumatic event imaginable on what should have been a day of family celebration. The psychological impact on Latrese's children was immediate and profound. Justin, who had held his dying mother, went into a state of shock that first responders recognized as acute trauma. He answered questions mechanically, his clothes soaked with his mother's blood, his eyes vacant. Little Jada, meanwhile, repeated the same devastating phrase to anyone who would listen. "My mom is dead. He killed my mom. My mom is shot." The children were quickly removed from the scene by a victim advocate from the Detroit Police Department, who brought them to their Aunt Megan's home, the very place they had been planning to celebrate Father's Day. There, surrounded by stunned family members, the full horror of what they had experienced began to sink in. Justin refused to change his blood-stained clothes until his grandfather gently convinced him, while Jada clung to her aunt, asking repeatedly when her mother would come to get her. Neighbors who had gathered outside the home provided crucial witness accounts. One reported seeing Maxwell's car parked nearby earlier that day. Another described hearing the argument escalate before the shots rang out. Ron Wilson, who had attempted CPR, gave police the most detailed account of the aftermath. The boy was just holding her, rocking back and forth, saying, "Mom, please don't go," over and over. "I've never seen anything like it, and I pray I never do again." These witness statements, combined with the children's accounts, would become central to the case against Earl Maxwell, who had fled the scene but would turn himself into authorities 3 days later. Detroit Police Department officers arrived at the Avon Avenue home within minutes of Justin's 911 call, securing the scene as paramedics confirmed what the family already knew. Latrese could not be saved. Detective Sarah Mendez took lead on the investigation, immediately issuing an all-points bulletin for Earl Maxwell with a warning that he should be considered armed and dangerous. Officers collected 5 shell casings from the living room floor, secured video footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera that had captured Maxwell's arrival, and began the painstaking process of interviewing witnesses. Within hours, the investigation had uncovered Maxwell's threatening calls to Latrese's ex-husband, establishing a clear pattern of premeditation. For 3 days, Maxwell evaded capture, triggering a citywide manhunt that kept Latrese's family in a state of fearful vigilance. Then, on June 21st, he walked into the 8th Precinct Police Station, accompanied by a pastor from his childhood church. According to the arresting officers, Maxwell appeared calm and resigned as he surrendered himself. During initial questioning, Maxwell made a claim that investigators found both disturbing and implausible, that he had accidentally shot Latrese 10 times during an argument that escalated out of his control. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he reportedly told detectives, a statement directly contradicted by the precision of the gunshot wounds and his prior threats. When confronted with evidence of his calls to Paul Dorsey explicitly threatening to kill Latrese, Maxwell changed his story, claiming he had been just talking and never intended to follow through. The tattoo bearing Latrese's name was visible on his arm throughout the interview, a macabre reminder of how love had twisted into deadly possession. Could you recognize the warning signs of a potentially deadly relationship before it's too late? As we continue exploring Latrese's story, I want you to consider what red flags were missed or minimized. Have you ever ignored concerning behavior in your own relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's learn from this tragedy together. Maxwell was charged with first-degree murder, a capital offense in Michigan carrying a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The prosecution built a formidable case, presenting evidence of premeditation through the threatening phone calls, witness testimony about Maxwell's stalking behavior, and the purchase of the murder weapon days before the crime. The trial began in January 2018, with Justin bravely taking the stand to testify about what he had witnessed. His composed testimony, despite his youth and trauma, proved devastating to the defense's claims of an accidental shooting. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on February 9, 2018. At sentencing, Judge Marvin Calloway addressed Maxwell directly. "You didn't just take a life. You shattered a family and traumatized children who will carry this burden forever." Maxwell showed no visible emotion as he was sentenced to life without parole, while Latrese's family embraced each other, finding small comfort in the justice served. The days following Latrese's murder plunged her family into a grief so profound it manifested physically. James Morris, who had lost his daughter on Father's Day, described it as a hole in my heart that nothing can fill. He temporarily moved in with Megan to help care for Justin and Jada, whose custody arrangements became an immediate concern amid their trauma. The community rallied around the family, establishing a memorial fund to cover funeral expenses and future therapy for the children. Latrese colleagues from the Physical Therapy Center organized meal deliveries and childcare assistance, practical support that proved essential as the family navigated their new reality. The funeral, held 1 week after the murder, drew hundreds of mourners, many of whom had never met Latrese, but were moved by her story. For Justin and Jada, processing their mother's death was complicated by having witnessed its violent nature. Child psychologists specialized in trauma were brought in, beginning the long journey of healing that would require years of consistent therapy and unwavering family support. The psychological wounds inflicted on Justin and Jada ran deeper than anyone could initially comprehend. In the months following their mother's murder, both children exhibited classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. 14-year-old Justin, who had held his dying mother, developed severe insomnia punctuated by nightmares when he did manage to sleep. He withdrew from friends and activities he once enjoyed, his grades plummeting as he struggled to concentrate. School counselors noted his tendency to startle at loud noises, particularly sounds resembling gunshots. 4-year-old Jada's trauma manifested differently, but no less severely. She regressed developmentally, returning to behaviors she had outgrown years earlier: bedwetting, thumb-sucking, and separation anxiety that made leaving her aunt's side nearly impossible. Most heartbreaking were her repeated questions about when her mother would return, unable to fully grasp the permanence of death at her young age. Child psychologists diagnosed both children with complex trauma, noting that witnessing such violence against their primary caregiver represented one of the most profound psychological injuries a child could experience. The road to healing began with establishing safety and stability. Megan Morris formally adopted both children, creating a legal and emotional foundation from which recovery could begin. A network of mental health professionals specialized in childhood trauma implemented a comprehensive treatment plan, including individual therapy, family sessions, and age-appropriate support groups for children who had experienced similar losses. For Justin, art therapy provided an outlet for emotions he struggled to verbalize. His therapist noted how his drawings evolved over time, from dark, chaotic images to gradually more structured and hopeful representations. Jada responded well to play therapy, working through her trauma by reenacting scenarios with dolls in a controlled, supportive environment. Both children benefited from EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a specialized technique for processing traumatic memories. The extended family created what therapists called a constellation of care, consistent adults who provided unwavering support. James Morris, despite his own grief, became a particularly important figure for Justin, offering the male guidance the boy desperately needed during his transition to adolescence without his mother. By 2021, 4 years after the tragedy, Justin's journey illustrated the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. At 18, he graduated high school with honors, delivering a valedictorian speech that briefly acknowledged his loss but focused primarily on future possibilities. "My mother taught me that education was freedom," he told his classmates, "and I carry that belief with me every day." Justin was accepted to the University of Michigan on a full academic scholarship, planning to study psychology with the goal of eventually helping other children who had experienced trauma. In interviews, he spoke of his mother's memory as a driving force. "Everything I achieve is because she believed I could. I'm living for both of us now." Latrese's murder represents a devastating statistic in America's domestic violence epidemic. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, more than 3 women are murdered by intimate partners every day in the United States. In 2017 alone, the year Latrese was killed, over 1,600 women died at the hands of men, with nearly 2/3 murdered by current or former romantic partners. Most alarmingly, researchers have identified that the period immediately after a victim leaves their abuser is the most dangerous, with a 75% increased risk of homicide. This separation danger explains why Latrese's decision to leave Maxwell, while necessary, placed her at heightened risk without adequate protection systems in place. Latrese case follows a tragically familiar pattern seen in domestic homicides nationwide. The case of Nicole Brown Simpson in 1994 highlighted how restraining orders often fail to protect victims. In 2015, Kimberly Diane Richardson was shot by her boyfriend while pregnant in North Carolina, despite multiple police reports documenting previous abuse. Just months before Latrese's murder, Shauna Vandevage and her infant son were killed by her husband in Texas after she attempted to leave the relationship. These cases share common elements: escalating controlling behavior, explicit threats before the murder, and victims who had recently taken steps to escape, demonstrating how our current systems often fail to intervene effectively during the most dangerous period for domestic violence victims. In the wake of Latrese's murder, Detroit community organizations mobilized to address domestic violence prevention. The Remember Latrese campaign raised funds for emergency housing for abuse victims attempting to leave dangerous relationships. Local police departments implemented enhanced threat assessment protocols to better identify high-risk cases requiring immediate intervention. Perhaps most significantly, Latrese's case prompted Michigan legislators to propose Latrese Law, which would create a specialized high-risk team to monitor cases where death threats have been made, regardless of whether the victim has requested protection. These responses acknowledge a painful truth. Latrese's death, while not preventable by her actions alone, exposed critical gaps in our social safety net that continue to endanger others. Latrese Morris-Dorsey was far more than the tragic circumstances of her death. She was a healer by profession and nature, a mother whose love continues through her children, and a woman who found the courage to seek freedom from abuse. Her 42 years were marked by generosity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to creating a better life for her family. Those who knew her speak not of how she died, but of how she lived, with compassion, determination, and joy even amid difficulties. Her legacy lives on most visibly through Justin and Jada, who carry their mother's spirit in different ways. Justin's academic achievements and dedication to helping others mirror Latrese, nurturing nature, while Jada's artistic talents reflect her mother's creativity. The Remember Latrese Foundation has helped dozens of families escape dangerous situations, transforming one family's unimaginable loss into a lifeline for others. In this way, Latrese continues to save lives, her story becoming a powerful catalyst for change in how we understand and address domestic violence in our communities. Latrese's story illuminates critical lessons about domestic violence that might save others. First, we must recognize that leaving an abuser is not a single act, but a dangerous process requiring comprehensive support. Latrese did everything right. She moved, established boundaries, and rebuilt her support network. Yet systems failed to protect her when Maxwell escalated from threats to action. Second, we must take threats seriously. Maxwell's explicit statements to Paul Dorsey about killing Latrese represented a clear warning that demanded immediate intervention. Research consistently shows that specific threats often precede actual violence, yet they remain frequently dismissed as just talk by authorities and even victims themselves. Finally, we must acknowledge that domestic violence affects entire families. Justin and Jada's trauma reminds us that children are not merely witnesses, but co-victims requiring specialized support. Their journey illustrates both the devastating impact of exposure to such violence and the possibility of healing when proper resources are provided. These lessons, though learned at tremendous cost, offer a roadmap for preventing similar tragedies and supporting those already affected. If Latrese's story has impacted you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that raises awareness about these critical issues. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you recognized warning signs in relationships around you? What actions did you take? Your experiences might help someone else identify danger before it's too late. Most importantly, share this video with anyone who might need them. As we conclude Latrese's story, remember that domestic violence thrives in silence and isolation. Breaking this silence, through education, conversation, and community vigilance, remains our most powerful tool for prevention. We must create a society where victims feel safe coming forward, where bystanders know how to effectively intervene, and where abusers face meaningful consequences before violence escalates to homicide. Latrese's death was not inevitable. It was the result of systematic failures we can and must address. By recognizing warning signs, supporting those at risk, and demanding better from our institutions, we honor Latrese's memory in the most meaningful way possible by preventing other families from experiencing similar heartbreak.